My name is Howard Edelman. I'm your host for Israel and the Jewish World. Tonight, we begin our 12th season of programs on Israel and the Jewish community. Thank you for joining us for an exciting and informative new season of shows. Our program tonight is called Torah and Identity. We first explore the revitalized Israel Museum in Jerusalem that houses the Dead Sea Scrolls. After a 3-year facelift, the world's greatest collection of Jewish art, Judaica, and archaeological artifacts from the Holy Land reopened to the public on July 26th. We were the first TV crew allowed to videotape the reorganized galleries and interview the director and several curators. Of the many parts of the museum, our focus was on our Jewish religious heritage. We sat in the recreated, exquisitely beautiful Suriname Synagogue with its white sand floor. This evening, we'll be able to give you a glimpse of this exceptional facility. The exploration of the Israel Museum provides background for a discussion of the centrality of the Torah to being a Jew in both Israel and the diaspora. For our non-Jewish audience, the Torah refers to the 5 books of Moses, or the Pentateuch in Latin. Torah also means teaching or instruction or law. So although many Jews today are secular, teaching, learning, and the rule of law are central to Jewish culture. Hence the thrust of our programs. By the way, now we have a website and email address and invite your feedback and comments. Stay with us for the show. My guest is James Snyder. He's the director of the Israel Museum in Jerusalem. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
James, you're renovating the museum, but I know that's a challenge for you. But before that, I want to ask you, why did you come here from MoMA, the Museum of Modern Art? Because that's where you were before.
I can answer your second question by clarifying the first.
Okay.
We're not renovating the museum. We are doing a transforming renewal of it to bring out the original intent of this very beautiful place. And the reason why I came here from MoMA is that when I was invited to consider being director, not having been here before, I came to see the museum and I thought it was the most beautiful and perhaps most powerful cultural landscape I'd ever seen.
Explain that. And explain also where we're sitting in the museum grounds, because it's a full campus here.
The museum is a campus setting. The site is 20 acres. 7 acres of it are a formal sculpture garden, and the rest of the site is occupied by 500,000 square feet of built museum area, including the original architecture for the museum by a Bauhaus-trained modernist named Alfred Mansfeld, who emigrated to Palestine in the 30s and brought international modernism to the region. The Shrine of the Book, which was designed by Frederick Kiesler, a European modernist who emigrated to America, and the Sculpture Garden designed by Isamu Noguchi, a Japanese artist who came to the US and in a way really created the notion of environmental sculpture. So the campus of the museum is actually a place which is about modernism.
And the Sculpture Garden is right behind us. That's a Henry Moore behind us?
We're sitting in a very beautiful grove within the heart of the campus. Behind us is the Sculpture Garden, and in the background of this image is a remarkable piece by Henry Moore.
Yeah, because in Toronto we have a lot of Henry Moores, because in City Hall and the great museum there.
That's true. The Art Gallery of Ontario has one of the great holdings of Henry Moore, as do we.
And you're redoing a Picasso back there.
We're doing a piece which was cast originally in 1967, 2 years after the museum was opened, as a process piece by Picasso, and we are doing an authorized reconstruction of the work now.
Now, in redoing this, not renovating, excuse me, redoing the museum, one of the greatness of the setting is the buildings fit right into the hill, because this sits on a hill, and you don't notice the buildings.
Well, this is actually part of what is the power of the place. I think you can't find another setting anywhere in the world where landscape and architecture, art and archaeology synthesize in the way that they do in this setting. And even if you don't have an understanding or an interest in any one of those four subjects, there's something about the power of their synthesis that makes you feel and know that you're in a place of culture.
But you also have reconceptualized the galleries, which we'll see later. And what's the vision behind the galleries?
You know, the original concept for the museum was to create a setting of modular modernism on this Jerusalem hillside that would feel like an ancient Jerusalem hillside town, but which could grow as the requirements of the museum would have it grow. Now, as a concept for a village, that's fine, and it's organic, but as a concept for a museum, it's a bit challenging. And since the museum was founded in 1965, the physical museum has grown by a power of 10, and the collections have grown to hold 500,000 objects.
It's a huge collection.
It's a vast collection, and the oldest objects are 1,000,000 years old, and the most recent objects are contemporary art created just within the past year. So our scope is actually universal, and the goal of the transforming, reconfiguring of the campus and of the galleries within the museum is actually to allow for a kind of self-guided and intuitive tour through the history of material culture from the beginning of time to the present.
Oh, so it's a historical theme set on a physical, spatial setting. Was that your conception?
I guess in a way it was. You know, the museum's collections are in three areas. Archaeology being principally the definitive collection of archaeology of the ancient Holy Land, Jewish world cultures of the Western and non-Western traditions, and the fine arts in Western and non-Western traditions. And at the time of the museum's founding, there was a sense of a goal of having several museums under one roof. And by the time of my coming, 30-some years later, and realizing the way in which the collections had grown and had deepened, I realized that it would be possible here, and perhaps not in any other museum setting anywhere else, to do a kind of continuum of the illustrated history of material culture over time.
Does that mean you had to study most of the 500 objects they had? How did you do it?
Well, my background is actually in modern art, in the origins of modern art in the latter half of the 19th century, and the idea of what caused the shift that created modernism. And when I came here to a museum with a collection as encyclopedic as this, I realized that in my own thinking, I was opening the floodgates to all the sources of modernism. So it wasn't so difficult to turn backward rather than forward, and to look at the breadth of this collection as a real continuum of the timeline of material culture.
Did it actually change? I mean, because if you take a shorter period and you're studying the origins of modernism, then you go back into the 18th, 19th century. But if you're reaching back 1,000,000 years in the history of art, does it change your sense of modern art when you see the full timeline?
Well, it does, and also if you're doing it from here, from Jerusalem, which is the fountainhead of monotheism in the three great traditions of monotheism, it really does give you a sense of a kind of thematic unfolding from, you know, existential awakening, existential reflection, polytheism, monotheism, formative Judaism, then formative Christianity, formative Islam. So you get a different sense of a glossary of iconographic images that really become the source material for visual culture.
It's interesting because, you know, if you do the 19th century and the vision of man as historically emerging, which is itself an idea that emerges. I mean, when you read Aristotle, you read Plato, it's always the same. It's only into the 18th century that you get a sense of historical development, unless you read the biblical text.
This is true, and this is why when you sit in a place like this, when you're in Jerusalem, and you think of the kind of panorama of the universe, you really do begin to understand that you can reach back much further into history to develop this timeline.
Does it make you, in this context, think of modern art, which is really divorced in some senses from religion and in the popular imagination? Does it reconnect with religion in any way?
Well, I think it makes you understand that religion has a lot to do with the iconographic imagery of the fine arts. That's definitely the case.
And no other way?
Well, I think you have to be careful there because you don't want ever to read everything with a single thematic overlay.
But there is, you still say there's an unfolding, a continual unfolding that you've seen.
Absolutely.
Okay, if you wanted to summarize that continual unfolding, how would you describe it in a substantive way?
Well, I think, as I've said, if you look at our collections, the oldest objects of 1,000,000 years ago simply show the hand of man touching materiality that has survived through time until today. But if you go back 10,000 years and you look at early Neolithic masks, and you come forward from that moment to the present, not only can you feel the sense of development from man reflecting on himself, to man thinking of the existence of other forces that control his life, to man thinking of a single force that controls his life, and then the development of different faiths having different views of how that has evolved. You can read that in material culture, and you can see its evolution over time. But then if you look at a Neolithic mask that's 7,000 years old, and you look at some contemporary sculpture, you see visual connections, formal visual connections, which are also very strong.
Well, I'm going to look forward to going through your new galleries. Thank you very much, James, for the interview and for the opportunity to see the museum.
Thank you, and it'll be a pleasure to have you back to be in the galleries anytime soon.